America didn't just respond, it obliterated. In a matter of days, nearly 95% of Iran's naval forces were wiped off the map. Warships turned into burning wrecks, others fled across the Indian Ocean, begging foreign ports for shelter. It looked like total victory. Clean, decisive, final. But while Washington celebrated control at sea, something else was happening. Something you were never meant to focus on. The Strait of Hormuz, an artery carrying roughly 20% of the world's oil, didn't reopen. It slowed to a crawl. Hundreds of ships stopped, thousands waited, and global markets started to feel it. From the outside, it looks simple. America wins. If that's true, why is everything getting worse? Why are supply chains tightening, prices rising, and tensions spreading far beyond the battlefield? They destroyed the fleet, but they didn't end the threat. And right now, without even realizing it, you are already part of what comes next. Iran didn't stumble into this crisis blindly. At least, that's what it looks like when you start connecting the dots. On paper, their move made sense. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another waterway, it is the single most critical choke point in the global energy system. Around 20 million barrels of oil pass through it every single day, roughly 20% of the world's supply, and Iran knew exactly what that meant. So when Tehran stepped forward and declared that ships from the United States and its allies would no longer pass freely, it wasn't just a threat, it was a calculated gamble, a dangerous one. I see it as a move designed not to win a war at sea, but to trigger something far bigger economic shock. Because the moment that flossa stops, everything else begins to break. Fuel prices spike, inflation follows. Governments come under pressure. And ordinary people like you, start to feel it almost immediately. But here's where things spiral. Iran didn't just block access symbolically. 17 commercial tankers were attacked. 6 of them were rendered completely unusable. And one of the most shocking moments, they even hit a Russian-linked vessel, an ally. Whether that was a mistake or a loss of control, it sent a clear message. This situation was no longer contained. From my perspective, that's the moment everything shifted. Because once you start hitting everyone, you're no longer applying pressure, you're creating chaos. And chaos doesn't stay local. Within days, shipping traffic through Hormuz didn't just slow down, it nearly stopped. Dozens of vessels turned back, hundreds anchored outside the Gulf, insurance costs exploded to levels never seen before. Iran may have believed it was holding a lever over the West, but what it actually pulled was something much harder to control, and the reaction it triggered was already on its way. The response from Washington was not slow, and it was not symbolic. It was immediate, calculated, and overwhelming. 2 of the most powerful carrier strike groups on Earth, floating air bases capable of projecting force across entire regions, were already in position. The moment Iran crossed the line, the deterrence phase ended. Fall was not a warning, it was a campaign. American forces began by targeting Iranian naval ports, fuel depots, maintenance facilities, and command centers were struck in rapid succession. Warships anchored in harbor were hit before they could even move. Others attempting to leave were intercepted and destroyed at sea. Within days, the scale of the damage became undeniable. Nearly the entire operational fleet of Iran had been neutralized, burned, sunk, or rendered useless. But the campaign did not stop at Iran's coastline. It extended outward across open water into one of the most aggressive naval pursuits in modern history. More than 60 Iranian vessels were tracked and engaged beyond their home territory. Some attempted to escape through the Gulf of Oman, others pushed deeper into the Indian Ocean, hoping distance might provide safety. It did not. American surveillance systems followed every movement. Routes were calculated. Interceptions were executed with surgical timing. One of the most defining moments came far from the Persian Gulf off the coast of Sri Lanka. The Iris Dina, one of Iran's key naval assets, was attempting to return home. After participating in an international exercise, it changed course, it accelerated, it ran, it wasn't enough. A U.S. submarine already positioned along its projected route fired a torpedo. The vessel was struck and sent beneath the surface. It was the first time since the Second World War that the United States Navy had used a torpedo to sink an enemy ship. The message was unmistakable. There was no safe distance, no safe route, no safe harbor. Other ships chose a different path, surrender through survival. Some diverted toward India, others toward Sri Lanka, requesting emergency docking under the pretext of technical failures. Crews were offloaded. Ships were detained. These were not tactical withdrawals. They were forced exits from a battlefield that expanded beyond anything Iran had anticipated. Across the region, the pattern repeated itself. Vessels attempting to disguise themselves among commercial traffic were identified and neutralized. Ships that once projected power were now fleeing, hiding, or sinking. The Iranian Navy, which had issued bold ultimatums just days earlier, was no longer operating as a coherent force. It had dismantled piece by piece across multiple theaters in real time. From a purely military perspective, the outcome was decisive. The United States had demonstrated total dominance at sea, not just in regional waters, but across vast distances. It had tracked, targeted, and eliminated an entire naval capability with a speed and precision that few had expected. And yet, even as the last ships disappeared from radar, one fact remained unchanged. The Strait of Hormuz was still not secure. From the outside, it looked like the war had already been decided. Iran's navy was gone, its ships either sunk or scattered across foreign ports. The headlines focused on destruction, on dominance, on a victory that seemed absolute. But beneath that surface, something far more dangerous was still intact and largely untouched. Because the real power Iran built over decades was never sitting on the water. It was buried, hidden deep inside mountains, carved into cliffs, spread across underground networks that satellites struggle to fully map. Missile systems designed to strike without warning. Ground launch facilities capable of reaching targets hundreds of kilometers away. And unlike warships, these assets don't need to move to be lethal. They were still there. And that changes everything. But what remained was the invisible layer of warfare, the one built specifically to survive exactly this kind of assault. And if you step back for a moment, you start to see the imbalance. It is far easier to destroy a fleet than to locate and eliminate dozens, possibly hundreds, of hidden launch sites spread along a rugged coastline. I think this is the point most people miss. You see the explosions, the footage, the confirmed losses, and it feels final. But it isn't. Because as long as even a fraction of those systems remain operational, the Strait of Hormuz is still a dangerous place. Any tanker moving through that narrow corridor is still within range. And the crews on those ships know it. You would know it too if you were standing on that deck, watching a horizon where the threat. The conflict didn't end when the last Iranian warship went down. It evolved. The Pentagon understood this almost immediately. Surveillance operations intensified. Satellites began scanning the coastline in detail, searching for thermal signatures, electronic emissions, anything that could reveal the location of underground facilities. Reconnaissance aircraft flew repeated patterns over the region, and when a target was identified with enough confidence, it was struck. Radar stations went silent. Drone sites were reduced to rubble. Entire sections of hardened infrastructure collapsed under precision bombardment. But even with all that, there is a limit. And this is where the situation becomes uncomfortable to acknowledge. You can destroy what you can find. You cannot destroy what you cannot see. Iran has had years, decades to prepare for exactly this scenario. Redundancy is built into the system. Facilities are duplicated. Some are likely still undiscovered, which means the threat is not only still present, it is designed to endure. So while the narrative says the United States won, the reality is more complicated. The battlefield didn't disappear. It shifted from the open sea, where power is visible and overwhelming, to the shadows, where uncertainty becomes the real weapon. And right now, whether you realize it or not, that uncertainty is what's keeping this conflict alive. At this point, the story should have been over. A navy destroyed, a military campaign executed with overwhelming force. From the outside, it looked like Iran had lost not just the battle, but its ability to influence But that assumption misses something critical. Because while the world was watching explosions and counting destroyed ships, Iran quietly shifted the battlefield into something far less visible and far more profitable. They didn't need to control the sea with warships anymore. They only needed to control fear. And suddenly the Strait of Hormuz wasn't just a conflict zone, it became a filter, a gate, a place where access itself had value. Reports began to surface that ships attempting to pass through were facing new unofficial conditions, payments, negotiations, delays that weren't random. In some cases, up to $2 million per vessel just to move safely through one of the most critical trade routes on Earth. Not officially declared, not openly enforced, but very real in practice. It might look like chaos, but if you look closer, it starts to resemble a system. Fewer ships moving, yes, but those that do, paying a premium, because now disruption itself becomes a source of income. I find that shift more unsettling than the missiles, because it means the objective may have evolved. This isn't just about blocking oil anymore, it's about controlling the flow selectively, allowing some through, stopping others, turning uncertainty into leverage. And if you were running a tanker company, or managing supply chains, or even just watching fuel prices creep upward, you're already feeling the impact of that leverage, whether you realize it or not. What makes it even more complex is who continues to move through that space. Not every country is affected equally. Some ships pass, others don't. Some routes remain open under specific conditions. And that uneven pattern sends a signal. This isn't a total shutdown, it's controlled pressure, directed, calculated. From a strategic standpoint, Iran may have lost the visible fight, but it gained something else: influence over timing, over cost, over risk. And in a global system where margins are tight and stability is everything, even small disruptions can ripple outward in ways that are hard to contain. So while the headlines focus on destruction, the underlying reality is different. The battlefield didn't disappear, it transformed into something quieter, less dramatic, but potentially more effective. Because you don't need a navy to control a choke point. You just need the world to believe it isn't safe without your permission. What makes this situation even more unsettling is not just what Iran is doing, but how the rest of the world is responding. Because while the United States is projecting overwhelming military force, other global players are quietly adapting, moving through the crisis in ways that reveal a very different balance of power. China, for example, is not reacting with fear. Its vessels continue to move through the region, not at full capacity, but with a level of confidence that stands out. ships openly broadcasting their identity, signaling clearly who they belong to, and in many cases, passing without interference. It's not officially acknowledged, but the pattern is difficult to ignore. While others hesitates, China adjusts. From a distance, it creates a strange contrast. On one side, you have the most powerful navy in the world escorting tankers, securing routes, trying to stabilize a region under pressure. On the other, you have select actors navigating that same space with fewer obstacles, leveraging relationships, timing, and strategic positioning. And it doesn't stop there. Countries like Pakistan and Turkey are no longer waiting for a coordinated global response. They are acting independently, escorting their own ships, negotiating their own pathways, protecting their own interests. Over 40 nations have entered discussions on how to handle the situation without relying entirely on American control. That alone signals something important. The system is fragmenting. From a strategic perspective, this is where the narrative begins to shift. Because power is no longer just about who can deploy the most force. It's about who can operate effectively within uncertainty. The United States can dominate a battlefield, but this is no longer a conventional battlefield. It's a network of overlapping interests, quiet agreements, and selective access. And if you look closely, you start to see the consequence of that shift. Influence is no longer centralized, it's distributed. Some countries gain flexibility, others face restrictions, some adapt quickly, others are forced to react. This is not a collapse of power, it's a redistribution of it. And in that redistribution, what uncomfortable question begins to emerge? If the United States can control the sea, but not control how the world moves through it, then what exactly does control mean now? And this is where it stops being about ships, missiles, or distant headlines, and starts becoming about you. Because while governments calculate strategy and militaries measure dominance, the consequences don't stay. On the battlefield, they move quietly, gradually, until they reach everyday life. Think about the next time you see fuel prices tick upward, or groceries costing more, or hear about delays in goods that used to arrive on time. This is where it connects. Not directly, not obviously, but through a chain of pressure that starts in places like the Strait of Hormuz and ends in your daily decisions. From my perspective, that's the part most people underestimate. Wars like this aren't just fought with weapons. They're fought through systems, energy, trade, supply. And when those systems are disrupted, even slightly, the effects spread far beyond the original conflict. You don't have to be near it to feel it. You're already inside its reach. And that creates a difficult question. Because if a conflict thousands of miles away can influence your cost of living, then how distant is it really? You might never see the ships. You might never hear the drones. But you will see the consequences. Bit by bit, increase by increase, adjustment by adjustment, until one day it doesn't feel like a fricing anytime soon. If anything, it's just entering a phase that's harder to recognize, but more persistent, less visible, but more personal. So the real question isn't just whether the United States is winning or losing, it's whether any of this was ever under control to begin with.